My husband smirked the day I lost everything. He said failure was in my blood. What he never knew was that I had already secured a fortune, $112 million, from selling a hidden patent. When he left me for someone younger, I let him take everything he could see. Months later, when the truth came out, he and his lawyer could only stare in stunned silence. Failure is in your blood, Catherine. Daniel said those words 3 months before leaving me for Emily. I remember that morning clearly because it was the first time he said aloud what I had long suspected he thought of me. I was reviewing quarterly reports from my department at Nexus Pharmaceuticals and mentioned another round of budget cuts. His reply came quick and effortless, between sips of the espresso I'd made for him at exactly 6:30 in the morning, just the way he liked it. Our penthouse kitchen had become the stage for that daily performance. 3 computer screens lined the marble counter where Daniel tracked market futures, with the Boston Harbor stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. I would stand at the espresso machine in my silk robe, already planning experiments for the day ahead, while he sat on his Italian leather bar stool, designer suit immaculate, gold cuff links catching the soft morning light. We moved through this routine with practiced precision. 2 actors who knew every cue but had long forgotten the feeling behind them. That morning I tried to explain that the biotech sector was restructuring, that budget cuts were happening everywhere. Daniel finally looked up from his screens, really looking at me for the first time in weeks. Some people rise above market conditions, he said, his tone almost amused. Others get swept away by them. That's just genetics. I stood there holding the coffee pot, watching my husband of 5 years reduce my entire career to a question of flawed DNA. The strange part was that I wasn't even surprised. That was simply Daniel, seeing the world through profit margins and spreadsheets, measuring people in basis points and annual returns. What he didn't realize was that 3 years earlier, while he slept off champagne from another record-breaking quarter, I had been quietly building something that would change everything. That same year, my grandmother, Nana Wells, passed away and left me $40,000 with a note in her shaky handwriting. For your freedom, Cara, not for any man. I used it to maintain a patent I'd created during my doctoral work at MIT, an algorithm that could transform genetic data processing in pharmaceuticals. I filed it under my maiden name, Catherine Wells. I kept it hidden within a shell company that my grandmother's estate attorney helped me establish, telling myself it was just smart planning. Every month, I paid the maintenance fees from an account Daniel never knew existed. He managed our finances with obsessive precision, convinced that money was the only true measure of success. But this one thing, this creation, was mine alone. Our marriage's power dynamic played out publicly at the firm's investment galas. Once a month we attended those elaborate gatherings at the Four Seasons or the Ritz, rooms full of men in nearly identical suits, discussing identical portfolios while their wives smiled and pretended to care about market volatility. I would try to join the conversation, mentioning breakthroughs in gene sequencing or molecular modeling, but inevitably it shifted. Catherine works with test tubes, Daniel would say, flashing that practiced smile that charmed everyone but me. I work with millions. The room would erupt in laughter. It always did. I would stand there in a designer dress he had chosen, holding a glass of champagne I didn't want, smiling through a joke that used me as the punchline. Tommy, Daniel's closest colleague, occasionally tried to show genuine interest in my research, asking questions about pharmaceutical applications. But Daniel would steer the topic back to safer ground: mergers, hedge funds, the elegant simplicity of compound interest. My wife's very bright, he would add with a laugh, the way one might praise a pet. MIT graduate, you know, but science doesn't exactly pay the bills. More laughter would follow, from men who measured intelligence in bonuses and returns. Eventually, I began slipping away from those parties, finding quiet corners where I could check encrypted emails from companies interested in licensing my algorithm. They didn't yet know the name Catherine Wells, but they understood the power of her work. Negotiations were still early, careful exchanges across secure channels, but I could feel the momentum building, pressure rising before a storm. Then came the Tuesday in October when everything began to shift. Tommy stopped by for drinks, lounging comfortably in our living room filled with curated art and overlooking the harbor. He talked about the firm's newest recruit, and I noticed the way Daniel leaned forward, a spark of excitement lighting his eyes, a look I hadn't seen since our early years together. Emily Carter, Tommy said, swirling his whiskey. Harvard M.B.A. Top of her class. She's got that hunger. You know, the kind that makes you certain she'll either make partner in 5 years or burn herself out trying. Daniel's expression changed. When does she start? He asked, intrigued. One day, Tommy grinned. You're assigned as her mentor. After Tommy left, Daniel couldn't stop talking about the importance of new talent, fresh perspectives, the need to nurture the next generation. He paced across the living room with a restless energy I hadn't seen in years, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. The firm needs people who understand the modern market, he said passionately. I forced a light smile and asked, trying to sound casual. Unlike me. Someone who speaks the language of molecular structures? He paused, giving me that familiar look. A blend of pity and disappointment. You know, that's not what I meant. But we both knew it was exactly what he meant. I was the wife who had been suitable when he was climbing the ladder, impressive enough on paper to complement his ambition. Now that he'd made senior partner, now that 8-figure deals were just Tuesday's small talk, I was becoming what he'd probably seen all along, a starter wife. Good enough for the ascent but not for the view from the top. That night, as I lay in our king-sized bed listening to Daniel's steady breathing, I made a decision. The patent negotiations would move forward. Faster now. The algorithm was complete and the market was ready. 3 companies were already circling with serious offers. My grandmother had been right to tell me to keep something for freedom. I just hadn't realized that freedom might mean walking away from everything I had built with a man who believed success measured in test tubes could never compete with success measured in portfolios. Tuesday morning began like any other. Coffee at 6:30, emails by 7, in the lab by 8. I was reviewing trial data when my computer pinged at 9:47. The subject line read, Organizational update, action required. The message itself was 3 paragraphs of corporate doublespeak about strategic realignment and optimizing core competencies. The truth was in the final line. Effective immediately, the molecular research division is being eliminated. 8 years of my work, my entire team gone. All our research into genetic markers for early disease detection dismissed as non-essential by executives who probably thought DNA was a stock ticker symbol. Security arrived 20 minutes later. Not hostile, just procedural. They stood by the door while I packed my belongings into the cardboard box they had thoughtfully provided. My hands trembled as I wrapped my MIT graduation photo in tissue paper. Carl, the security guard I chatted with every morning for 5 years, couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Dr. Wells, he said quietly. Orders from corporate. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I focused on fitting 8 years of my life into that box, research papers, awards, and the coffee mug my team had given me that said "World's okay, boss." Each object was a quiet farewell to a life I had built one experiment at a time. My phone buzzed. Daniel. I typed, just got terminated. Mass layoffs. My fingers hovered, wanting to add something more, to ask for reassurance. His reply came 30 seconds later. We'll discuss tonight. 4 words. That was all 8 years of my career warranted. They read less like comfort and more like a meeting reminder. The walk to my car felt endless. Other employees were being escorted out too, each carrying a box like a membership card to a club no one wanted to join. Dear. Lillian Park from immunology was crying softly. David from data analysis kept muttering about his mortgage. None of us met each other's eyes. We were all locked inside our own private collapse. I sat in my Honda for an hour in the dim light of the parking garage, unable to start the engine. 2 calls came from recruiters, biotech vultures who had somehow already heard about the layoffs. I let both go to voicemail. When I finally went home, Daniel was in our bedroom, choosing cuff links from his collection. The Hermes tie he adjusted cost more than some people's monthly rent. He caught my reflection in the mirror, taking in my red eyes and crumpled blouse. Read client dinner, he said flatly. Japanese executives can't reschedule. I stood in the doorway holding my termination papers, waiting for him to turn and actually look at me. When he did, the irritation on his face made it clear my crisis had interrupted something far more important. His evening plans. So, he said, straightening his collar, Nexus finally pulled the trigger. You knew. I managed to ask, my voice cracking. The whole street knew, he replied. Biotech's been hemorrhaging cash for months. Your department was always first on the chopping block, high overhead, minimal revenue generation. He spoke with the same tone he used when analyzing a failed investment. No recognition that this investment was my entire life. 8 years, Daniel, I whispered. I gave them 8 years. He sighed, the exasperated kind he reserved for when I was, in his view, being emotional about something purely logical. Then he stepped forward, placed his hands on my shoulders, and looked me straight in the eyes. Failure is in your blood, Catherine. The words settled heavily between us. Not shouted, not cruel, just delivered as though he were stating a fact, the way someone might note eye color or ancestry. Some people are built for success, he continued, his grip still firm. Others work hard all their lives and never quite break through. There's no shame in knowing your limits. He kissed my forehead, dismissal disguised as tenderness, then returned to his cuff links. I'll be late. Don't wait up. 2 nights later, I learned exactly what my new unemployed status meant to him. Daniel hosted 8 colleagues for dinner, one of his spontaneous gatherings designed to showcase our perfect life. I spent 3 hours preparing Chilean sea bass with saffron reduction, following a recipe from one of his approved cookbooks. Where's the brilliant scientist tonight? Tommy asked as I served appetizers. Catherine's between opportunities, Daniel answered before I could speak. The phrase came effortlessly, his tone implying it was a permanent condition. Actually, I'm exploring several options, I began, but Daniel cut in smoothly. She's taking time to reassess her career trajectory, he said with a pleasant smile. Sometimes a setback is just an opportunity to recalibrate expectations. The men nodded, impressed by his supposed wisdom, as if he had delivered some profound insight rather than quietly erasing my career. I stood there with the tray of canapés I'd spent an hour arranging, visible only as evidence of my usefulness. What kind of research were you doing? Daniel, one of the newer associates, asked politely. Genetic markers for early cancer detection, I began. We were developing. Very technical stuff, Daniel interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. Not exactly dinner conversation. Val, could you check on the main course? I retreated to the kitchen, listening as their conversation flowed effortlessly back to market projections and acquisition strategies. Through the serving window, I watched my husband command the room. Animated, confident, occasionally gesturing toward the kitchen while explaining that I was still adjusting to the new reality. That night, after the guests had gone and Daniel had fallen asleep, satisfied with his performance as the successful husband with the appropriately diminished wife, I locked myself in the guest bathroom with my phone. The marble countertop was cold beneath my legs as I sat cross-legged, whispering to a representative from Helix Dynamics. Dr. Wells, your algorithm could revolutionize our entire data processing framework, the voice on the other end said. We're prepared to make a substantial offer, but we'll need absolute confidentiality. I kept my voice low, terrified Daniel might wake and question why I was on a call at 2 in the morning. The patent is under my maiden name, I whispered. It cannot be traced back to my married identity. Of course. Can we schedule an in-person meeting? I glanced at my empty calendar. Days stretching ahead filled with job applications. Daniel expected me to fail and dinners where I'd be paraded as the cautionary tale of aiming too high. Thursday, 10 a.m., I said. Starbucks on Massachusetts Avenue. Not the one near the financial district. As I scheduled more calls with competing firms, speaking in hushed tones from bathrooms and closets around the house, I began to feel like a spy gathering intelligence in enemy territory. The enemy just happened to be sleeping in Egyptian cotton sheets in the next room, dreaming the smug dreams of a man who'd successfully reduced his wife to a manageable disappointment. The Thursday meeting at Starbucks went better than I could have hoped. The Helix Dynamics representative left with shining eyes after reviewing my algorithm's test data. And I walked out knowing an offer was close. For the first time since losing my job, I felt something close to hope. That feeling lasted exactly 9 hours, until I met Emily Carter. The firm's spring gala was held at the Mandarin Oriental, one of those events where people pretended philanthropy was the reason for their attendance. I wore the black Versace dress Daniel had bought me 2 years earlier, back when he still cared about presenting me as someone worth showing off. He'd been distracted all week, checking his phone constantly, rearranging plans around someone else's schedule. I should have known. She appeared during the cocktail hour, gliding through the crowd in a red Carolina Herrera gown that probably cost 3 months of my former salary. Everything about her was deliberate. The way the fabric hugged her athletic frame, the diamond studs catching the light, the effortless confidence in every motion. She moved like someone who already believed she belonged everywhere. When she spotted us, her path became a straight line. "You must be Catherine," she said, her handshake firm and her smile rehearsed. "Daniel talks about you constantly." The way she said constantly told me exactly what kind of conversations those were. Her gaze swept over me, assessing with surgical efficiency, mid-30s, unemployed, wearing last season's dress. Threat level minimal. "Emily Carter," she continued, though we both knew I already knew her name. "I'm the new analyst Daniel's been mentoring. He's been absolutely transformative for my understanding of emerging markets." She launched into an animated discussion about Asian market volatility with the same energy I once had for RNA transcription. Daniel watched her with open fascination, occasionally adding comments that made her laugh. An easy, intimate sound that made my skin crawl. I stood there, champagne glass in hand, feeling like a piece of decorative furniture, visible but irrelevant. "Harvard M.B.A. Class of 2022, she mentioned casually when someone asked about her background. "But the real education comes from working with someone like Daniel. He sees patterns others miss." My husband beamed under her praise. His posture shifted, shoulders squared, chin lifted, the same stance he used when closing major deals. When another colleague joined the circle, his hand drifted to the small of Emily's back, guiding her closer. The motion was brief but deliberate, and she leaned into it ever so slightly. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel's LinkedIn transformed into a shrine to mentorship. Every other post featured the two of them, bent over laptops at Mistral, reviewing spreadsheets with their heads nearly touching, or toasting at the Harbor Club over another client acquisition. Their body language spoke volumes, the subtle touches, the shared laughter, the unspoken intimacy that no caption could conceal. Her comments appeared within minutes of his posts. "This is why you're the best in Boston, brilliant insight. So lucky to learn from the master," always accompanied by fire emojis. Meanwhile, my texts went unread for hours. When he did respond, the replies were curt. "Running late. Client emergency. Don't wait up." I started checking her Instagram obsessively, searching for proof of what I already knew. Her stories were curated displays of success. Morning workouts at Equinox, meetings in glass-walled offices, evening cocktails at reservation-only lounges. Daniel began appearing in more of them, always professional enough to avoid scandal, yet intimate enough to leave no doubt. Thursday, April 15th. I remember the date because it was the night my last piece of denial disappeared. Daniel had actually come home for dinner, a rare occurrence that month, when his phone rang at 10:45. His face shifted instantly to concern. "Tokyo markets," he muttered, already reaching for his jacket. "No, you're right, we need to deal with this now. I'll meet you at the office." He kissed my forehead absently. Crisis with the Yamamoto account. Could take all night. By 2 a.m. Unable to sleep, I called his office line. It rang endlessly before switching to voicemail. I tried his cell straight to voicemail. Then I remembered the location sharing we'd enabled years ago during a trip to Europe, never thinking to disable it. My hands trembled as I opened the app. The pin showed him at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, not his office. My stomach turned to ice. I switched to Instagram and opened Emily's latest story. A champagne glass raised against city lights, tagged Ritz-Carlton with the caption, "Late night strategy session," followed by a champagne emoji and a sparkle. I sat on the bathroom floor until dawn, the phone still in my hand. Phone still in hand, watching his location remain fixed at the hotel. When he finally came home at 6 in the morning, his shirt was untucked, his hair slightly mussed, and his expression carried that strange mix of fatigue and satisfaction. "Long night?" I asked from the kitchen, where I'd been sitting with a cup of cold coffee. "Exhausting," he said, already heading for the shower. "But we saved the account." He didn't meet my eyes. On Saturday morning, my mother appeared at the door unannounced. Clara Wells had an almost supernatural instinct for her daughter's unhappiness. One glance at my face. Dark circles under my eyes, hollow cheeks from barely eating all week, and she wrapped me in a hug that made me feel 15 again. "Tell me," she said softly, guiding me to the couch. I told her everything about Emily, the late nights, the lunches, the way Daniel looked at her like she held all the answers he'd been searching for. Mom listened quietly, squeezing my hand whenever my voice cracked. "Some men only see your worth once it's gone, baby," she said when I finished. "Your father was the same with his first wife. Didn't realize what he had until she built a new life without him." "This is different," I protested. "Daniel and I built something together." She smoothed my hair, her touch gentle but steady. "You built something," she said. "He just lived in it." Her words landed like truth I wasn't ready to admit. "What are you going to do?" she asked. For a moment, I almost told her about the patent, the meetings, the algorithm, the negotiations that would soon make Daniel's portfolio look like loose change. But something stopped me. That secret felt sacred, too powerful to expose, even to her. "I don't know yet," I said finally. "But I'm working on something." She studied my face, recognizing the same determination I'd had years ago, when I pursued my doctorate despite everyone saying biotech was too unstable. "Good," she said. "Whatever you're planning, make sure it's for you, not against him. The best revenge is a life well lived, not a life spent chasing vengeance." She stayed for lunch, filling the kitchen with the familiar scent of her pasta sauce, while trying to lift my spirits with stories from her book club. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet penthouse, staring out at the harbor as another email arrived. An even higher offer from a competing biotech firm. The figure made my pulse quicken, but I needed time to think. That evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual. I should have known what was coming. He entered the living room with the calm precision of a man about to deliver a rehearsed speech. The leather chair he chose was his favorite, positioned to frame him perfectly against the view of the harbor. He crossed one leg over the other, adjusted his cuffs, and looked at me with the same detached professionalism he used when firing underperforming associates. "Catherine, we need to have a conversation about our future." The tone was deliberate, his words chosen and practiced, likely refined in his office, perhaps even with Emily's input. I sat opposite him, the coffee table between us feeling as wide as an ocean. "We've grown apart," he began, hands clasped. "The person I was 5 years ago needed something different than what I need now. You're brilliant, but we're on different trajectories." He continued for nearly 20 minutes without once meeting my eyes. His gaze fixed somewhere past my shoulder, as if I were already gone. He used terms like natural evolution, strategic realignment, and optimizing individual potential. When he mentioned Emily, it was with practiced neutrality, praising her grasp of quarterly projections and merger strategy as if those were the foundations of a marriage. "She speaks the language of my world," he said finally, his eyes finding mine at last. "You're more at home in a lab than in a boardroom. There's nothing wrong with that, but I need someone who can match my pace, understand my ambitions." 5 years of marriage distilled into a performance review. I had apparently failed to meet expectations. I wanted to tell him about the calls I'd been taking, the algorithm that would soon reshape an entire industry, the offers that dwarfed his earnings. Instead, I stayed silent and let him believe he was the one making the strategic decision. When he finally stopped talking, I managed to ask, "When?" "I think it's best we move quickly," he said. "Cleaner for everyone involved." The next morning at precisely 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Standing there was Daniel Rowan, Daniel's lawyer, an executioner in an Armani suit. His briefcase contained documents that had clearly been drafted well before Daniel's speech. Every asset cataloged, every clause crafted to seem generous while ensuring Daniel kept everything of value. "Mrs. Wells," he said with a professional smile that didn't touch his eyes, "I'm here to discuss the dissolution paperwork. Mr. Wells has instructed me to be as generous as possible, given your current employment situation." The emphasis on current told me they'd already discussed my termination in detail, factoring it neatly into their calculations. He spread the documents across the dining table, the same one where Daniel and I had celebrated anniversaries, shared dreams, planned our future. "The terms are quite favorable," he explained smoothly. tracing his manicured finger down the pages. Mr. Wells retains the penthouse, as the mortgage is paid primarily from his income. The Porsche as it's leased under his name. The investment accounts as they were funded from his bonuses. He paused, smiling faintly. You would retain your personal vehicle, clothing, jewelry received as gifts, and of course personal effects. My 9-year-old Honda and whatever I could fit inside it. That was their valuation of 5 years of marriage. Rowan's smile widened just slightly, as if I should be grateful Daniel wasn't seeking spousal support from his unemployed wife. I'll need to review this with my attorney, I said. Of course, he replied. Though I should note that Mr. Wells's offer is contingent on a swift resolution. Prolonged negotiation would require revisions to the offer. Clara Denton's office occupied a corner suite overlooking Boston Common. She had built her reputation dismantling the egos of wealthy men who mistook net worth for actual worth. When I finished explaining, she listened quietly, taking notes in elegant, looping handwriting. Standard high-net-worth divorce tactics, she said finally. He wants you grateful for crumbs while he keeps the bakery, Clara said, reading Rowan's stack with the care of someone defusing explosives. Given Massachusetts law and your current finances, these terms are, unfortunately, reasonable. I want to accept them, I said, catching the flicker of surprise on her face. With one change, an absolute mutual release clause. No future claims by either party under any circumstances. Her pen stilled. She studied me with the kind of scrutiny that wins trials. That is unusually sweeping. If you inherited money next week, won a lottery, any windfall, he would have no claim. But the reverse stands as well. If he makes partner, doubles his income, wins his own lottery, you receive nothing. Perfect, I said. Make it ironclad. No loopholes, no exceptions, no matter what happens. Clara drummed her fingers. A tell when she's mapping consequences. You are planning something. I am planning to move forward, I answered. This clause makes sure we both do that completely. She held my gaze, then nodded. I will draft language that can withstand any challenge. But Catherine, once you sign, it is final. No second chances, no buyer's remorse. No court in Massachusetts will undo a mutual release this strong. I understand. We signed 3 days later in Rowan's conference room. Dark wood, leather, and rows of pristine law books meant to intimidate. Daniel sat at the head of the table in his lucky deal closing suit, wearing the scent of Genevieve's perfume like a victory flag. Rowan slid the revised agreement forward with grave formality. This mutual release is extremely comprehensive, Mr. Wells. Are you certain you are comfortable with it? Daniel barely skimmed the clause. In his mind, I was a failed scientist with no prospects, no assets, and no future worth accounting for. If it expedites the process, I am fine with it, he said, signing with the flourish of a man who believed he had closed another brilliant deal. As he pushed the papers to me, I thought of the email from Helix Dynamics, the final offer beyond even my boldest projections. My hand was steady as I signed, knowing the value of that signature exceeded anything Daniel could imagine. Congratulations, Rowan intoned, all false solemnity. You are now officially divorced. Daniel stood, adjusted his cuffs, and offered a last polished benediction. I hope you find what you are looking for, Catherine. I nearly laughed. I had already found it. He simply did not know. I left Rowan's office with divorce papers in my hand and air in my lungs that felt like freedom. The elevator ride from the 40th floor felt like descending from one life into another. By the time I reached the garage, I was already scrolling apartment listings. The performance of starting over needed to begin immediately. The Cambridge apartment I chose was perfect for my purposes. Second floor of a 3-story brownstone on a tree-lined street just off Massachusetts Avenue, close enough to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology that professors and graduate students filled the sidewalks. A shop below sold used books and mediocre coffee that somehow tasted better than anything the penthouse machines produced. The unit was small, 1 bedroom, a living room that also served as a dining space, and a kitchen where 2 people would need choreography. The radiators clanged at night, the windows rattled when trucks passed, but the exposed brick and original hardwood felt like character, not decay. I paid 3 months up front in cash and told the landlord, Mrs. Park, that I was recently divorced and rebuilding. She patted my hand and mentioned her own divorce 30 years ago. You will see, she said. Freedom tastes better than security ever did. My 9-year-old Honda looked perfectly at home, parked right out front, visible to anyone passing by. I left it there most days, moving it just enough to avoid tickets, always returning it to the same prominent spot. The narrative had to be consistent. Divorced woman, limited resources, starting over with whatever scraps her ex-husband left. The Whole Foods bag I carried upstairs held instant noodles, generic cereal, and screw-top wine. Anyone watching, and I knew someone would see exactly what they expected. What they would not see were the documents I had signed that morning at my attorney's office, finalizing the transfer of $112 million through a Byzantine web of trusts and shell companies that would keep the money effectively invisible until I chose to reveal it. My routine became deliberately public. Every morning at 8:30 I walked to the Daily Grind, a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology where biotech recruiters favored informal interviews. I claimed the same corner table, spread printed resumes and job postings, and highlighted sections with color-coded pens purchased specifically for this theater. The performance demanded relentless attention to detail. Another interview? The barista Kevin, a grad student, would ask with sympathy. Third one this week. I would answer with practice fatigue. The market is difficult right now. I took real phone interviews for jobs I did not intend to accept, speaking just loudly enough to be overheard, discussing modest salary requirements, expressing enthusiasm for entry-level roles beneath my qualifications, thanking recruiters for considering me despite the gap. Twice I recognized people from Daniel's circle, friends of friends who would surely report back about poor Catherine, trying to rebuild after being traded for a newer model. Daniel Cho called only on encrypted lines and only at prearranged times, his voice careful even through multiple layers of security. The secondary transfers are complete, he would say. The trust structure is fully operational and the paper trail non-existent. To any review, you are living on savings and whatever you can earn while job hunting. 3 weeks into my new life, on a Thursday evening as rain turned the streets into rivers, Patricia Wells arrived at my door. Daniel's mother stood in the hallway holding a covered casserole and wearing that particular kind of sad smile that comes after days of rehearsing what to say. I hope I'm not intruding, she murmured, though we both knew she wouldn't have come if she thought I'd turn her away. I invited her in, watching her take in the small apartment, the second-hand furniture, the modest decor carefully chosen from estate sales, the stark contrast to the penthouse where she'd spent so many holidays. She placed the casserole on my narrow counter and pulled me into a hug that lasted just long enough for both of us to pretend we weren't crying. I raised him better than this, she whispered into my hair. We sat at my little kitchen table, the one I'd bought from a graduate student returning to India, sipping tea from mismatched mugs while rain beat against the window panes. Patricia looked older than I remembered. There were new lines at the corners of her eyes, a faint tremor in her hands. I knew about her, she said suddenly. Emily, I knew before you did. I stayed silent, letting her unburden herself. He brought her to lunch at the club, Patricia continued, staring into her tea. Introduced her as his protégé, but I saw how they looked at each other. The way she touched his arm. The way he laughed at everything she said. I should have warned you. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, I said softly and meant it. Daniel made his choices. Are you managing? She asked, glancing around the apartment again. Financially, I mean. I could help. I'm fine, I assured her. Really? I've got interviews lined up and my savings will last for a while. She wanted to believe me. Needed to believe her son hadn't completely ruined me. I let her have that comfort, even as my mind wandered to the meeting scheduled for tomorrow at the Four Seasons. A meeting where numbers that would shatter her imagination would be discussed in hushed tones. Ethan Morey, one of Cho's associates, specialized in managing wealth for what he called ultra-high net worth individuals. He was already waiting in the private dining room when I arrived. Documents lay neatly arranged on the table like a feast of possibilities. Ms. Wells, he said, addressing me by the name on all the trust paperwork, we need to discuss strategies for your assets. For 2 hours we spoke about diversifying across global markets, setting up offshore accounts in jurisdictions with favorable tax treaties, and building financial structures that would generate long-term income while preserving complete anonymity. Every document I signed bore the name Catherine Wells, the same name Daniel once said sounded too ethnic for Boston society. The name he'd urged me to drop professionally now stood atop accounts containing more wealth than his entire firm managed. Your ex-husband, Maury said carefully, has no way to trace these assets. He has no idea they exist, I replied. And legally, even if he discovered them tomorrow, he has no claim. The mutual release clause was comprehensive. Maury smiled faintly. Then we proceed as planned. Your wealth remains invisible until you decide otherwise. That evening, walking back to my apartment, I stopped at the grocery store and bought more instant noodles, making sure the Whole Foods bag was visible as I climbed the stairs. The bag sat later on my kitchen counter, next to the bank statements I left casually in sight whenever anyone visited. 3 months had passed since the divorce, and my portrayal of the struggling ex-wife remained flawless. On a Tuesday morning in late July, I began preparing for what would mark the unraveling of my illusion. The annual Boston Biotech Summit was being held at the Heinz Convention Center, and attending was essential for maintaining my cover as an aggressively job-hunting scientist. I dressed carefully in my last remaining designer suit, the navy Armani I had kept because it still projected competence, and took the T instead of calling a car service. Every detail mattered. The convention buzzed with the familiar mix of academic curiosity and corporate ambition. Graduate students hustled between booths while recruiters handed out branded pins and promises. I registered under Dr. Catherine Wells, my professional name, and moved from booth to booth collecting business cards I would never need. The whispers began around noon. I was speaking with a recruiter from Genentech when her eyes shifted over my shoulder. Her expression changed, the subtle kind of change people make when a puzzle piece suddenly clicks. "Excuse me," she asked carefully. "Did you say your maiden name was Wells?" The question sounded innocent, but the tone beneath it wasn't. Behind her, 2 executives from another firm whispered in low voices, their eyes flicking toward me. "Yes," I said evenly. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," she replied too quickly. "It's just there's been talk about a major acquisition. Some revolutionary patent in genetic sequencing. The seller's name was Wells. Such an unusual coincidence." I smiled politely and steered the conversation elsewhere, but the damage was done. By the afternoon, I could feel awareness spreading through the crowd like ripples on water. Conversations hushed when I approached. People stared a second too long. When I finally checked my phone around 3 o'clock, there were 17 missed calls from unfamiliar numbers. That evening, I scrolled through Instagram in my Cambridge apartment, and there it was. Emily's story. A screenshot from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office database, key sections highlighted. The caption read, "Interesting how some people preach transparency in relationships while hiding major assets. The truth always surfaces. #integrity matters, #financial honesty." The next few posts cut even closer, screenshots of Massachusetts divorce law about asset disclosure. A photo of her and Daniel at dinner captioned, "Supporting each other through deception and betrayal." And then, the most revealing one yet, a picture of the Helix Dynamics building with 3 question mark emojis. She was close. Her network in the venture capital world had been whispering, connecting dots between the mysterious Wells patent and Daniel's discarded ex-wife. I could imagine her growing frustration, trying to prove what she suspected but couldn't yet confirm. The next afternoon, while I sat in the coffee shop pretending to review job listings, my phone rang. Tommy's name flashed across my screen, and I instantly knew the call had been planned, almost certainly with Daniel listening in. "Catherine, hi. I hope I'm not interrupting." His tone was too casual, the kind that comes only from someone over-rehearsing. "Tommy," I said evenly, "this is unexpected." "Yeah, well, I've been thinking about you, the divorce, the job situation. Must be tough." He paused, waiting for me to fill the silence with useful information. When I didn't, he continued, "Listen, I know things ended badly with Dom, but we're still friends, right? If you need help financially, I could probably arrange something. A loan, or maybe even a position at one of our portfolio companies." The offer was so clumsy it almost inspired pity. Daniel was probing through his proxy, trying to confirm whether the rumors about me held any truth. "That's very kind, Tommy," I said calmly, "but I'm managing fine on my savings." "Your savings?" he echoed, his voice catching slightly. That's good. Must be nice to have that cushion. Won't last forever though, not in this city. I'm quite frugal these days. A long pause followed, silence thick with frustration, as he scrambled for another angle. Well, if anything changes, you have my number. I appreciate that, Tommy. When the call ended, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, pretending to review job listings while my pulse thudded with quiet satisfaction. The trap was closing perfectly. Daniel's circle had begun connecting the dots, but still lacked confirmation. Rumor was doing its work. All that remained was to turn speculation into fact. That evening, I opened my laptop and logged into the dormant Wells Biosystems account. It was time for the final move. I composed a single, calculated email to the head of public relations at Helix Dynamics. Subject: Update to press materials. Dear Ms. Patterson, as discussed during our initial negotiations, I have maintained a low profile regarding the patent acquisition. However, I believe it is now appropriate to update your public materials to reflect the full name of the patent holder for accuracy and transparency. Please amend all references from Dr. V. Wells to Dr. Catherine Wells Wells. Thank you for your continued discretion. Best regards, Dr. Catherine Wells Wells. I pressed send and closed the laptop. Within hours, perhaps sooner, the updated information would appear in Helix Dynamics materials. Their next quarterly report would identify me fully, leaving no ambiguity. The connection between the mystery inventor and Daniel's ex-wife would be undeniable. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the summer twilight fade over Massachusetts Avenue as students hurried by. My phone buzzed. Another Instagram notification from Emily. Yet another attempt to piece together a puzzle that was about to solve itself. Tomorrow, or the day after, Daniel would finally understand the cost of underestimating me. He would realize that while he'd been calculating my limitations, I'd been building something beyond his comprehension. The woman he'd dismissed as a failure, whose very blood he'd called defective, had built an empire greater than everything he had ever achieved. I thought of Patricia with her weary compassion, of Tommy fumbling his rehearsed lines, of every dinner party where I'd been reduced to the wife who worked with test tubes. Soon the truth would be public. But the calm didn't last. By Thursday evening, Cambridge was swallowed by a violent summer storm, rain sliding down my windows like ink. I sat reading a medical journal, keeping up with my field despite my supposed unemployment, when my phone began to vibrate on the table. Daniel's name filled the screen. Felt inevitable, like prophecy. I let it ring 3 times before answering, steadying my breath. Catherine. His voice was unrecognizable. Strained, uncertain, stripped of the arrogance that once filled rooms. Hello, Daniel. The patent, the Helix Dynamics acquisition. It's you, isn't it? Catherine Wells Wells. There was no use denying it. By then, the press release had been updated, financial blogs ablaze with the story of the mysterious inventor who had revolutionized genetic sequencing. By 3 o'clock, someone had already connected that inventor to the recently divorced wife of senior partner Daniel Wells. Yes, I said simply. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the storm and his uneven breathing. 112 million, he said slowly, as if the number itself refused to make sense. You had $112 million when we divorced. No, I corrected. I had a patent when we divorced. The sale was finalized 2 weeks after you signed the papers. That's semantics, he snapped. You were in negotiations. You knew what it was worth. You sat there in that conference room and let me think. His voice cracked. You let me believe you had nothing. I let you believe what you already decided, I said. That I was a failure. That my work in test tubes, as you called it, would never amount to anything. This isn't fair. We were married for 5 years. That patent, your research, it happened during our marriage. I have rights. You have exactly what you negotiated for, I replied. The penthouse, the Porsche, the investment accounts, and a mutual release clause that prevents either of us from claiming the other's assets. Your lawyer called it excessive, remember? You said you didn't care as long as it expedited the process. I could hear him pacing, probably in his office or our old penthouse. Then came the faint sound of a door closing, followed by a woman's voice. Emily, of course. We need to talk about this in person, he said. It's nearly midnight, Daniel. I don't care. We need to resolve this. The line went dead. I sat back, listening to the steady rhythm of rain against the glass, and waited. I didn't change out of my pajamas or bother to make myself presentable. There was power in meeting him exactly as I was, no longer performing as the composed wife or the broken divorcee. The doorbell rang at 12:17 a.m. Through the peephole I saw Daniel standing in the hallway, drenched despite the short walk from his car. Behind him, just visible at the edge of my vision, Emily lingered on the stairs, waiting probably to witness whatever she imagined would happen. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He stood there dripping onto the worn hallway carpet, clutching a manila folder like a lifeline. May I come in? No. The refusal seemed to stun him. In 5 years of marriage, I had rarely denied him anything so directly. Catherine, please be reasonable. We can work this out. He opened the folder, revealing pages thick with legal phrasing. My attorney drew these up. A post-divorce settlement modification. We can share the proceeds from the patent. 50-50. That's more than fair, considering. Considering what? I interrupted. That you divorced me? That you took everything you wanted? That you told anyone who'd listen that failure was in my blood? His face flushed, whether from shame or anger I couldn't tell. I was going through something, he said quickly. Emily and it wasn't supposed to happen that way. But this isn't about her. It's about what's fair. Fair. I let the word linger on my tongue, bitter and hollow. Was it fair when you introduced me at parties as your unemployed wife who was between opportunities? Was it fair when you said I wasn't built for the rooms you walked into? I didn't mean. He stopped himself, straightened and shifted tactics. The penthouse. I'll give it back. The car. Everything I took in the divorce. You can have it all back. Just share the patent money. I looked at him. This man who had once measured worth in bonuses and balance sheets, now reduced to bargaining with someone he'd dismissed as insignificant. Behind him, Emily stepped closer, no longer content to stay hidden. The patent was filed before we married, I said calmly, though adrenaline surged through me. It was maintained with my grandmother's inheritance. Money you never knew existed because you never once asked about my family's finances beyond our joint accounts. And it was sold after our divorce was finalized. You have no legal claim to it. Legal technicalities, he snapped, his voice rising. You know this isn't right. You deceived me. I protected myself, I said evenly. There's a difference. That was when Emily snapped. She stormed past Daniel into my apartment, her designer heels squelching against the floor, mascara streaked in dark lines down her cheeks. You manipulative witch, she screamed, raising a hand as if to strike me. I caught her wrist, firmly but not harshly, feeling her tremble with fury. He chose you for your ambition, I said quietly, meeting her eyes. I chose silence for my freedom. We both got exactly what we wanted. She yanked her hand away, stumbling backward into Daniel, who caught her automatically. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice breaking. We'll make sure everyone knows what you did. What did I do exactly? I asked. Filed a patent under my legal name? Maintained it with my own inheritance? Sold it after my divorce? Which part would you like to make public? Daniel's face drained of color. He pulled Emily toward the door. At the threshold he turned once more. I loved you once, he said softly. No, I replied. You loved the idea of me, the MIT graduate who made you look progressive, the scientist's wife who made you seem sophisticated. But you never loved me, Daniel. If you had, you'd have known I was capable of this. I closed the door and stood still, listening to their footsteps fade down the stairwell. Through the window I watched them climb into his Porsche, Emily gesturing wildly while Daniel sat motionless behind the wheel. Eventually, the red taillights disappeared into the rain-soaked night. I stood in my small apartment, surrounded by second-hand furniture and the carefully crafted evidence of supposed poverty, and felt nothing but peace. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, accusations, and attempts at public shaming, but tonight, in the quiet aftermath, I had already won. I had protected myself and I owed no apology for it. The rain kept falling, washing the city clean. I stayed by the window until the storm softened to a drizzle, then faded altogether. Dawn crept slowly over Cambridge, pale and deliberate. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. By morning I had made my decision. The performance of poverty had served its purpose. It was time to stop hiding. 3 months later, in October, an invitation arrived, printed on cardstock so heavy it felt like armor. Helix Dynamics was hosting their quarterly board meeting and wanted me to present the applied developments of my algorithm to directors and investors. The presentation would take place in their flagship conference room, with an audience that included some of Boston's most powerful figures in biotechnology and finance. That morning, I dressed carefully in a new charcoal gray suit, perfectly tailored. My modest Cambridge apartment had already been replaced by a brownstone in Beacon Hill, though I'd made the move quietly, slipping away one Sunday when the streets were empty. The Helix Dynamics boardroom sat 40 floors above the city, its panoramic windows turning Boston into a chessboard of ambition and consequence. As I set up my presentation, the executives began filing in. I recognized several faces from Daniel's firm: Michael Reed, the managing partner who once spoke to me like I was ornamental; Daniel Mitchell, who used to laugh the loudest whenever Daniel mocked my test tubes; and in the back row, trying to blend into anonymity, Tommy, the same Tommy who had called weeks earlier, pretending concern while fishing for financial details. The senior executive officer began. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Catherine Wells, whose pioneering algorithm has positioned Helix Dynamics at the forefront of genetic medicine. Her work will fundamentally transform how we approach disease detection and treatment." I took the stage, not as the unemployed wife they had once pitied, but as the architect of something they could barely comprehend. I guided them through the real-world applications of my algorithm, early detection models that would save lives and generate profits beyond their imagination. As I spoke, I watched Michael Reed's expression shift. He was calculating, translating medical advancement into net worth. I could almost see the numbers forming behind his eyes, what $112 million in proprietary innovation meant against his own firm's holdings. When I finished, Reed's voice carried the polished restraint of a man aware he was standing on the wrong side of history. "This is remarkable work, Dr. Wells. I believe you were previously married to one of our senior partners?" "Previously," I confirmed, meeting his gaze evenly, "though I'm sure Daniel has moved on to better things." The room went silent. Everyone already knew the story, how Daniel Wells had divorced his wife for a younger woman, only to learn weeks later that she had sold a patent worth 9 figures. 2 weeks later, the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser transformed the Four Seasons Ballroom into a glittering constellation of Boston's medical and financial elite. I attended as a platinum sponsor, my name printed prominently beside old money philanthropists whose families had been funding endowments for generations. I saw them before they saw me. Daniel and Emily stood near the silent auction tables, his hand resting on the small of her back, the same way it once rested on mine. Her engagement ring caught the chandelier's light, elegant, but modest compared to the one he had given me 5 years earlier. He looked older now, the gray creeping into his temples, his posture a little heavier. The whispers trailed them like smoke. Monumental misjudgment. Could have been set for life. She was worth how much? His colleagues avoided him politely, their greetings thin, their eyes already moving toward more profitable conversations. Our eyes met across the room as I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. For a heartbeat, time froze. I saw the realization flicker across his face. The gown, the confidence, the quiet power that no longer required validation. Around me, investors and scholars discussed the scholarship fund I had just announced. I raised my glass slightly, not in triumph but in acknowledgement. We had both gotten exactly what we'd chosen. He turned away first, guiding Emily toward the exit. They left before dinner was even served. A month later, my mother's 70th birthday brought our entire family to my Beacon Hill brownstone. The house felt alive, warm and personal, filled with photographs, laughter, and the smells of home-cooked food. It was everything our sterile penthouse had never been. My cousins browsed through the library, their children played in the garden, and my aunts took over the kitchen, cooking as if feeding a small army. When dinner was ready, I stood at the head of the table, the candlelight glinting off crystal and silver. "I need to tell you all something," I began. I told them everything, the patent, the money, the secrecy, the reason I'd hidden it all through the divorce. Some were stunned. A few were angry I hadn't trusted them. But my mother only smiled. My daughter, she said, raising her glass, who knew when to speak and when to stay silent. Who built her success not on anyone else's foundation, but her own. To Nana Wells, I added, whose inheritance made it all possible. I announced the creation of the Wells Scholarship Fund at MIT, 4 annual scholarships for women pursuing graduate degrees in biotechnology. That night, after everyone had gone and the house grew quiet, I sat in my study overlooking the Charles River. The room smelled faintly of leather and old paper, nothing like the sterile glass and chrome of the penthouse office. I opened a sheet of stationery and began to write. Daniel, you were right about one thing, we spoke different languages. Yours was about taking. Mine was about building. You measured success in acquisitions, I measured it in discoveries. You saw my work as test tubes and failure. I saw it as the foundation of a future you couldn't imagine. The fortune you never knew existed was never about the money. It was about knowing my worth when you didn't, protecting my future when you dismissed it, and finding peace in the truth that the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served with perfect documentation, and the patience to let people reveal who they truly are. I don't hate you. I'm grateful. Your blindness taught me never to let anyone else define my value again. I folded the letter, sealed it, and locked it in my desk drawer. Some words are meant to be written but never sent. Truths that deserve to exist without being shared. Outside, Boston shimmered in the night. Its skyline a mosaic of ambition, ego, and people still chasing approval from those who would never truly see them. But in that study, surrounded by the life I had built with precision and patience, I finally understood the simplest truth of all. The only person whose approval I ever needed was my own. Catherine's flawless revenge kept you hooked until the final line. Smash that like button right now. My favorite moment? When Daniel finally realized that the fortune had always been in her name. What was yours? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget, subscribe and tap the bell for more stories of betrayal and triumph.